The Boys has always had a messy cast. That is part of the appeal. The whole show is built like a corrupt media machine where every corner has another freak, mascot, spokesman, fake hero, failed hero, or person who got chewed up by Vought and somehow kept smiling for the cameras. So when people say a character should not be there, it can sound wrong at first, because The Boys is supposed to feel overcrowded. That is the world. Everyone is selling something. Everyone is being used. But there is a difference between a crowded world and a bloated story. A good side character in The Boys does one of three things. They either expose Vought, sharpen one of the main characters, or push the plot into a worse place. That is why characters like Stan Edgar work so well. He does not need superpowers, a huge backstory, or constant screen time. He walks into a room and immediately makes Homelander feel smaller. That alone justifies him. Soldier Boy works because he turns Butcher's hatred into something uglier. Even a ridiculous character like The Deep works at his best because he shows what Vought does with useless men who are still famous enough to protect. The weaker characters are the ones who take time without changing anything. They arrive, make noise, give the show another subplot, and then leave the story almost exactly where they found it. Sometimes they are not even badly acted. Sometimes the idea behind them is understandable. The issue is that the show already had better ways to say the same thing. The clearest example is Colin in Season 4. Colin is not a terrible idea on paper. Frenchie has always been haunted by the things he did before joining the Boys. He was not just a fun drug chemist with a soft heart, he was a killer. He worked for monsters, did horrible jobs, and carries that guilt under the romance, the jokes, and the chaos. So giving him a relationship with someone connected to one of his old crimes sounds like it should work. It should force the past into the room in a way he cannot dodge. The problem is that the show had already done that with Frenchie. More than once, Frenchie's whole arc with Kimiko was already about guilt, violence, shame, and the possibility of being loved after doing things you cannot clean off. Kimiko is not some random love interest standing there to forgive him. She is someone who understands the same kind of damage. Their relationship works because it is built on two people who know they are not innocent, trying to become something better without pretending the past vanished. That is already the emotional center of Frenchie's story. Then Colin arrives, and instead of deepening Frenchie, he mostly resets him. Suddenly Frenchie is back in the same hole. He is guilty again, self-destructive again, pushing Kimiko away again, doing drugs again, and spiraling again. It is not that those behaviors are impossible. People relapse emotionally. People repeat old damage. But in drama, repetition has to reveal something new. Colin does not reveal enough. He gives Frenchie another reason to hate himself, but we already knew Frenchie hated himself. He gives Frenchie another person he hurt, but we already knew he hurt people. He gives Frenchie another reason to run from Kimiko, but the show had already spent seasons making that dynamic more interesting without needing him. That is why Colin feels less like a character and more like a detour. He is introduced with emotional seriousness, but he never becomes specific enough to matter beyond Frenchie's guilt. Once his function is done, the show can almost fold him away. The result is not tragedy, it is admin. The audience is basically watching the writers file another document under Frenchie has a dark past, when that folder was already full. Daphne, Huey's mother, has a similar problem, but in a different way. Huey's family history matters. His dad is one of the show's few gentle figures, and the contrast between him and the world around Huey is important. Huey begins the show as a normal guy whose life is destroyed by superpowered carelessness. That ordinary background is the whole point. He is not Butcher. He is not built for this. His grief drags him into a war he was never meant to fight, so bringing back his absent mother could have been useful. It could have explained something about Huey's fear of abandonment, his need to cling to people, or his constant pull between normal life and violent resistance. But the actual storyline feels oddly mechanical. Daphne returns, there is tension over why she left, Huey's father is dying, Compound V gets involved, and the emotional mess becomes another extreme event in a season already full of extreme events. The issue is not that Huey should not have a mother. The issue is that Daphne feels introduced less because Huey needs her dramatically, and more because the plot needs somebody else to make a hard choice around his father. She becomes a moral buffer. The show gets to put Huey through grief without making him fully own the ugliest decision in that storyline. That weakens the drama. The Boys is usually at its best when characters have to live with the direct consequences of what they choose. Butcher chooses revenge and loses pieces of himself. A Train chooses self-preservation and has to stare at the damage it causes. Annie chooses public truth and gets punished for it. Huey, in this case, is surrounded by pain, but the most uncomfortable action gets displaced. Daphne can do the messy thing, Huey can react, and the show can still keep him sympathetic. That might be easier for the character, but it is less interesting for the story. Daphne also does not reshape Huey afterward in a strong enough way. She does not become a major emotional presence. She does not meaningfully alter his place in the Boys. She does not change the war against Vought. She comes in, opens an old wound, participates in one of the season's strangest family tragedies, and then the show moves on. Again, the acting is not the problem. The purpose is Todd is a more complicated case because he actually does serve a purpose at first. Todd works when he is a normal guy infected by Vought's propaganda. That idea is strong. The Boys needs people like Todd because Homelander cannot just be a scary man in a cape. He has to be a movement. He has to be something ordinary people believe in. Todd shows how Vought's poison reaches the suburbs, the schools, the family dinner, the birthday party. He is not a supervillain. He is worse in a quieter way. A regular man who thinks he is being brave while repeating slogans made by a corporation. That version of Todd is useful. The problem is that the show does not keep him at that level. It pushes him so hard into obvious Homelander worship that he stops being disturbing and becomes easy. He becomes the guy the audience is supposed to hate on sight. That can be satisfying, but it also makes him less sharp. The best version of Todd would have been uncomfortable because you could recognize him, not agree with him, not excuse him, recognize him. The kind of person who slowly gets worse because every algorithm, every speech, and every fake news segment gives him permission. Instead, Todd becomes more of a prop in MM's family conflict. His presence lets MM feel threatened in his own home, especially around his daughter, and that should matter. But the show does not need Todd for long once that point is made. He does not have enough inner life to remain interesting, and he is not dangerous enough as an individual to become a real antagonist. He is a symptom. Symptoms are useful, but only if the show knows when to stop staring at them. With Todd, the boys keeps making the same point. Propaganda turns ordinary people into idiots for power. True, but once that point lands, Todd has nowhere else to go. Tek Knight is probably the most frustrating, wasted character because the concept has real potential. A Batman-style figure inside the boys' universe should be gold. The show has already mocked Superman, Aquaman, speedsters, celebrity teams, Christian superhero branding, fake feminism, military nostalgia, and corporate pride campaigns. A billionaire detective hero could have opened another target entirely. Tek Knight could have been the show's way into rich man vigilantism, surveillance fantasy, private security, tech worship, and the weird public love of men who build weapons and call it justice. That is a huge lane. Instead, in the main show, Tek Knight mostly becomes an excuse for shock comedy. The Boys has always been disgusting. That is not new. The show was never tasteful, and it should not suddenly become polite. But the best gross scenes in The Boys usually expose something. The deep in the gills scene is disgusting, but it also strips away his fake confidence and turns his body into a joke he cannot control. Herogasm is obscene, but it shows how power protects people from shame. The violence can be absurd, but it usually points somewhere. Tek Knight's material feels thinner. The show gets the immediate reaction it wants, but it leaves behind very little. The character does not become a major threat. He does not reshape the plot. He does not deliver a new angle on Vought that the show could not get elsewhere. He is built up like a famous figure in this universe, but when he arrives, the main impression is that the writers wanted to see how far they could push the joke. That is not enough. What makes it more annoying is that The Boys already has plenty of comic relief. The deep is still there. New Black Noir has a comic angle. Ashley has panic comedy built into almost every scene. The show does not lack absurdity. What it sometimes lacks is discipline. Tek Knight could have sharpened the satire. Instead, he adds to the feeling that the show is occasionally more interested in topping itself than in aiming properly. Cameron Coleman is another character who makes sense as world building, but not always as story. A Vought News personality is a useful idea. The show needs a media machine. Homelander's power does not only come from lasers and flight, it comes from screens. It comes from people repeating his version of reality until half the country accepts it as truth. Cameron represents that machinery. He is the face that launders Vought's lies into something official looking, but as a character, he is barely more than a mouthpiece. That can be fine in small doses. The issue is that The Boys already has stronger ways to show propaganda. Vought itself does it. Homelander does it at rallies. Firecracker does it with more personality. Ashley does it from inside the corporate panic room. Sage does it with strategy. Cameron is often just the broadcast version of something the show already said better through a character with more skin in the game. That makes him useful as texture but weak as presence. He helps the world feel real, but he does not help the drama much. When the show cuts to him, you understand the function immediately. Vought is lying. The media is rotten. The public is being managed. Fine, but that is not a character arc. That is a button the show presses. The bigger issue underneath all of these characters is that The Boys sometimes confuses expansion with depth. Adding another person does not automatically make the world richer. Sometimes it just gives the show another mouth to say what another character was already saying. Colin says Frenchie is guilty. Daphne says Huey has unresolved family pain. Todd says Homelander's movement has infected normal people. Tek Knight says powerful men are perverts and hypocrites. Cameron says Vought controls the media. None of those ideas are useless. The problem is that The Boys had already earned most of them through better characters. Frenchie's guilt was stronger with Kimiko. Huey's softness was stronger with his father. Homelander's political infection was stronger through crowds and Ryan. Vought's hypocrisy was stronger through the Seven. The media satire was stronger when it came directly from the corporate machine, not just a talking head. That is why these characters feel disposable. Not because every character needs to be as important as Butcher or Homelander. They feel disposable because if you remove them, the main shape of the show would barely change. Some scenes would need rewriting, but the story would survive almost untouched. And that is the real test. You cannot remove A-Train without damaging the show. His accident creates Huey's story, and his guilt becomes one of the better long-term arcs. You cannot remove Annie without losing the inside view of the Seven and the moral contrast to Vought. You cannot remove Ryan because he is the living argument between Butcher and Homelander. You cannot even easily remove the Deep, as stupid as he is, because his continued survival says something nasty about fame, shame, and how little accountability matters when someone remains useful. But you can remove Colin, you can heavily reduce Daphne, you can compress Todd, you can rewrite Tech Knight out of the main plot. You can make Cameron Coleman a recurring screen graphic instead of a character. The machine still works. That is the criticism. The Boys is not weak because it has too many characters. It is weak when it gives time to characters who do not create pressure. A show this violent, political, and chaotic needs every subplot to squeeze the main story harder. When a character arrives and only repeats a theme, the pace starts to feel fake. Things are happening, but the story is not moving. The strongest version of The Boys is cruelly efficient. A character enters, and suddenly somebody's lie gets exposed. Somebody's weakness gets worse. Somebody's choice becomes harder. That is when the show feels alive. The weakest version is when a character enters, makes a point the show already made, and leaves behind nothing but screen time. That is where characters like Colin, Daphne, Todd, Tech Knight, and Cameron Coleman become a problem. They are not all equally bad. Some have good ideas behind them. Some work for a scene or two. But the show does not need good ideas floating around. It needs characters who force the story to become sharper. And too often, these characters do not sharpen The Boys. They just make it heavier.